The insults are getting desperate, dangerous, and tedious. I don't mean the insults against me, although there are one or two insults against me from time to time, and I think they are a bit desperate, dangerous, and tedious, but I'm talking about the insults against Nigel Farage and the rest of Reform in general by Labour ministers. So what am I talking about? So my video yesterday, I talked about why it is wrong, lazy, and a bit silly to be throwing the label racist around, but they are doubling down today, along with some worse comments which could land them in a defamation suit if they're not very careful. One such comment that had David Lammy backpedaling quicker than a toddler going downhill with no brakes. So I'll come back to that in a minute. But first of all, if you like that joke, do subscribe. If you didn't like it, subscribe and tell me that you didn't like it and I won't do any more jokes. But let's take a look at this, because this is Shabana Mahmood doubling down on the racist comment. I didn't really expect that from her, to be quite honest, because I did sort of hold out hope that she's actually going to stand up in her role and sort of wipe this sort of stuff out. Now, many people might think that these policies are somewhat racist, but I assure you they're not. They are just government policies, and for all the reasons I explained in my video yesterday, they are just not. But have a listen to what she said here.
Do you think Nigel Farage is racist?
I think that Nigel Farage is actually almost worse than that. I think he knows exactly what he's doing. I think he's being extremely cynical. He knows that with some of the policies he's put forward, which are on indefinite leave to remain, for example, immoral and in my view extreme, he is sending that dog whistle to every racist in the land, but he wants to retain some respectability for himself whilst he does it, and that's what we're challenging.
Now, the only main difference between those policies is that Nigel Farage or Reform's policy, proposed policy, is to apply these changes to indefinite leave to remain retrospectively to those that are already here. If you want to hear more about that, I'll link my other video below from yesterday. Do go and watch that as well. But I'm a bit disappointed by this. I don't think that that comment is necessary, because for all the reasons I said, I think labelling someone as racist is a bit lazy. But on to the more dangerous comments, and we'll find out in a minute just who really is desperate in my view. And spoiler alert, I don't think it's Nigel Farage. Whether you love him or hate him, I don't think he's the desperate one here. But when you reach into insults like this, I think it really shows who is the real desperate one here. Have a listen to what David Lammy said.
I will leave it for the public to come to their own judgments about someone who once flirted with Hitler Youth when he was younger. That is for the public.
So David Lammy says he will leave it to the public to come to their own judgment about someone, Nigel Farage he's referring to, who once flirted with the Hitler Youth when he was younger. Now, on the basis that Hitler Youth was formed in 1926 and dissolved, of course, with the end of the war in 1945, and Nigel Farage wasn't born until April 1964. That doesn't really make David Lammy much of a mastermind than he's been in the past. But now let's look, because he's obviously, I would suggest he's probably had a call from lawyers or his team to say, you can't really say that because you don't have parliamentary privilege outside of Parliament. I mean, you shouldn't really say that in Parliament either, but you certainly don't have privilege outside, meaning you could be sued for defamation and could quite likely be sued if Nigel Farage could be bothered with such a thing. I suspect he wouldn't, and I suspect he's far too busy to do things like that. But because he's probably had his shoulder tapped about his comment, this is his backpedaling. Listen to this.
You made.
He has denied it. And so I accept that he has denied it, and I would like to clarify that position, because in the end, the Prime Minister was keen for us to focus on the policies, not the individual.
Let's talk about one.
So he's clear that he's happy to clarify it because the PM wants them to focus on policies and not the individual, despite so many people labelling Nigel Farage racist and David Lammy saying that he flirted with Hitler Youth, even though it was so many years before he was even born. Speaking of dangerous comments, let's take a listen to what Diane Abbott also said. Now, all these things, you've got to bear these in mind with what other people have said and what other people have gone to prison for, because it could be taken literally. I suspect many people wouldn't take this literally. They would take it as being quite ridiculous. But by the by, listen to what she says here.
he's only got 5 MPs. And the danger is, I'm all for people giving him a good kicking. We're streeting.
She said she's all for giving him a good kicking. Now, it's a good thing she explains sort of what she means after that, at least if you watch it with some level of intellect, but still shouldn't have said it. I mean, if we're sending people to prison for what they've said online, and police are turning up because they've called somebody a muppet, and people are being sent to prison for what they've posted online, let's just run that again.
He's only got 5 MPs. And the danger is, I'm all for people giving him a good kicking. Where Streeting did that this morning. But the danger is if you give him too much free publicity, you turn him into a bigger figure than he is. The thing about reform is I'm old enough to remember the
So give him a good kicking. Now, I presume she means by way of speeches and criticism and things like that. But then she goes on to say, if you give him too much free publicity, he becomes bigger than he already is. Well, I suggest that this really reveals who's the desperate one here, because not that I'm coming out all swinging in defense of Nigel Farage, but it is quite comical to see these comments and this backpedaling and squirming going on. Now, I won't play it, but Nigel Farage did do a response here. It's 7 minutes long. You can go and watch it. A response to Keir Starmer's comments, and accuses him of inciting violence against him. There's another story about his security being removed. I'm going to look into that as well. So then I thought I'd take a look at the voting intentions. And as you can see from YouGov here, it doesn't look good for Labour. It looks like a bit of a wipeout of a loss of 267 seats, where Reform will gain 306. Conservatives to lose 76, SNP to gain some, Greens and everyone else relatively insignificant. So this says that it projects a hung parliament where Reform will be almost certain to form a coalition or minority government. So this doesn't really look desperate at all for Reform or anyone in it. If anything, it looks quite desperate for Labour, which is probably why they're coming out swinging with all these different slurs and slogans and speeches to attack Reform constantly and attacking Nigel Farage constantly. But now we come to what is probably Keir Starmer's biggest nightmare, and that is the relentless crossing of boats and migrants across the Channel, because this is without doubt one of the biggest political issues of our time, whether they like to admit it or not. And as you can see over the last few days, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of migrants flooding into the country, with only a handful going out, with a one-in, one-out deal with France, which is a net zero return. And this is obviously going to be a big issue for them to deal with. But here's where the insults get really interesting, because Keir Starmer continues to say that Nigel Farage is to blame for the boats and the migrants coming across because of Brexit, because that did away with the Dublin Convention, which is not quite as straightforward as it sounds. I mean, in short, the Dublin Convention meant that we could return migrants back to France, but what people miss is that they could also be returned here. So now we get comments like this from Gully Foyle here saying, two very well-respected senior UK journalists are both crystal clear that Keir Starmer is lying about the small boats crisis being caused by Brexit, and poses the question, why are we tolerating the Prime Minister outright lying to the nation on a daily basis? And these two journalists' comments here as follows from Andrew Neil. Keir Starmer claims Nigel Farage is to blame for the boat people because Brexit took us out of the Dublin Convention in 2020, which allowed us to return asylum seekers to the EU countries from whence they came. The PM is either ignorant to the facts or knowingly lying. Neither's a good look. The Dublin Convention was a two-way street for asylum seekers. Yes, we could return them, but others could also be returned to us. As a result, the Dublin Agreement actually made us a net recipient of asylum seekers. And again from John Rentoul, said, surprised by the PM repeating Ed Davies' bogus analysis, boats are nothing to do with Brexit and the Dublin Convention never worked. So again, just throwing these comments because they believe that the public will believe them. They believe that the public will adopt all of these comments and therefore stand against the person that they are criticizing. And that is what I don't like about politics. And that is what I really don't like about the slurs of racism and all those sort of things. Make your points, sure, but as soon as you attack the person like that, unless you can demonstrate that they are being dishonest about what they are saying, which is entirely different, then I think they are empty. And in some cases, as in the comments by David Lammy, I think downright dangerous because they are defamatory in nature. And the comments by Diane Abbott, albeit it is clear that she's talking about a verbal kicking rather than a physical kicking, she really still shouldn't be making those comments all the same. I think that is out of order, quite frankly. And I think these comments overall are dangerous. So from a legal perspective, as the government said, think before you post, or for this lot, think before you open your mouth. I hope you found that interesting and entertaining. Do subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.